on the construction manager selection committee, because I know you spent all day here yesterday. So thank you, Jay and Bob and Nicole and Mr. Brewster, and I think Mr. Adams is not here yet, but thank you to all of you. With that, our agenda tonight is the programming committee is going to talk through some of their recommendations. We will review the revised space summary, review revised plans, site plans, and massing, and we will discuss some alternatives to send to get estimates on. So I'd like to introduce Ms. Hastings, who's Vice President of the school board and who has been chairing the programming working group.
Thank you. Thank you for having me tonight. I chaired the program working committee, and we have looked at various aspects of design that have impact on the learning spaces and athletic fields, which is a learning space as well, yes. But to give feedback to the architects for design. And it was really a fascinating and interesting process. And I continue to learn a lot from that. Committee members were Jillian Dubois, Tom Croto, Adam Blackenbecker, Elizabeth Hoadley, Caitlin Sackman, Courtney Levesque. And then from the school district, we had Superintendent Murphy, Assistant Superintendents Yarlott and Fabrizio, Communication Director Terry Wolf, RMS Principal Jay Richard, and then we had Holly and Tina from HMFH Architects. So they are doing a lot of meetings with us, and we appreciate that. We've met 3 times. We met on March 11th, March 28th, and April 18th. There's a typo in there, sorry about that, we repeated it. It was a really big meeting though. So our group members, they were selected for their diverse experiences and perspectives. The group included parents, educators, PTO members, community organizers, and disability rights advocates, which were critically important when we were talking about the special student services areas, and they had some amazing contributions that I can't wait to talk with you about. Many of our members did do a tour of the current Runlet site prior to really getting into our work so that they could see what they were working with, what the situation was at the current middle school, and the kind of things that they were looking at designing or suggesting for design in the future middle school. And we really appreciate Jay making that available, not just one time, but several times to different groups of people, so that was great. And we did come up with a list of recommendations. I think you have them in front of you. I'll just kind of go over them quickly, and then if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. One of the first things that came up was making sure that all of the classroom spaces were in line with the recommended state guidelines, and that might seem like, well, of course, but our current middle school does not have that. The school spaces, the classroom spaces are not in line, they're too small. So that's a really big one that we want to be sure that we're correcting as we move forward. We encouraged design in team pods. That was how it was presented to us, and the group really liked the pod section, so that within each grade level you might have 2 or 3 pods, similar to what, Jay, what do you call them now?
Teams.
Teams, yep. Like 6-1, 6-2, 6-3. Yep. This, you'd have the same thing, but your pod would stay in one area and you would share locker space in that area, and you wouldn't need to do a whole lot of moving throughout the school day on your own. You would have everything you need. Your bathrooms are right there in the pods, the lockers are in the pods, and you would move as a class to various specials. But other than that, you would pretty much stay in your pod, which was a good size. We did suggest that additional flex rooms be added to the pods to accommodate approximately 10 students, and those might be used as pull-out classrooms for special education services, maybe some speech and language if students required it. For group meeting spaces, we'd love to see students working in groups and being more collaborative together and working that way. Project work areas. and also a multi-language learner space. We did have a member of the community come in and speak to us about how it would be really, really nice for students who English is their second, maybe third language, to have a place where they could meet regularly in their groups and in their pods, or maybe you only have one of these extra special places in a grade level configuration, so that that group could meet and celebrate their diversity and talk about their challenges and their successes. And so I think we added, at least on 2 floors, we suggested that, and I think you had added those there. Those sort of one extra bonus flex room, we called it. From our second meeting where we discussed special ed and student services in great detail, one of the very first things that came up, and it was something I certainly never thought of and was moving for me to hear that, was that when you originally had the school designed and you walked in, there was this large grand staircase going upstairs to the gym, and it was beautiful. It didn't, there was nothing, I thought, oh my gosh, that's beautiful with all the glass in the staircase. But it was brought to our attention that that could seem like a barrier to someone who has mobility issues. And we hadn't really thought about that. So we have suggested that we look at that, and maybe if we want to keep that, one of the best things that we could do is make sure that the elevator is at the entrance of that stairwell, and that the exit for the elevator is at the top of the stairs where students would be coming out of the stairwell, to provide that sort of equality or equity, if we can, for those things. Another thing concerning the elevators was that it would be great to make them large enough to allow for inclusion of students with all abilities, not just students with mobility issues. Include room for a stretcher in the unfortunate event that we might ever need one, and the accompanying adults and staff that would be required with such an issue. And to make the interior more like a hotel elevator than a cargo elevator, if you will. And I didn't think too much of that until I went to the high school and needed to take an elevator up because I had a broken leg. And I got in there, and it was rickety and scary, actually. It was very small, it was very metally, and not at all welcoming, and it made loud noises, and it was a little bit scary. So I can only imagine how someone who had to use that on a daily basis to get around their school might find that not very welcoming. So those were some inclusions and things that we suggested. We were very interested in adding a ramp on the outside of the building for emergency egress. We talked about putting them on the inside as well. It sounded like that could be a very expensive addition, and I don't know where we stand with that. I'm sure Tina and Holly can help us with that afterwards. Another suggestion the group had was to put the occupational and physical therapy rooms in the center of the building and near the gymnasium, because for some students that is their physical education, and it makes sense that they would be where their peers are doing their work at the same time other students are doing their physical education. Include sensory-based rooms at least on 2 levels. We do have students who have sensory issues, and it would be great for them to have a room where they could work. And now again, that could be one of those pull-out rooms that we talked about earlier, the extra flex room that was added. There were spaces put in, I believe, you can see on the map that there we do have, each pod does have a calming space there, I guess. And that would be a great spot for students who need those sensory areas just to go and recalibrate. Interestingly, too, for me, because it wasn't something that I would have personally thought of, was attention when walking into off Main Street and into the cafeteria. There is a very large space as you take your food and you go to look and you turn, and you've got like 180 seats facing you. And that for students with some anxiety issues or social anxiety, that could be very concerning for them. So we talked about, could you put up some plants or build in some half walls, or what kind of things could we do that would make that a more welcoming space for all of our students. Next, I'm looking at we discussed moving the locker rooms to the same level as the gymnasium. The first designs that we saw had the locker rooms on the first floor and the gym on the second floor, which would have required students to go up and down the stairs, causing them to move within the building, maybe without as much supervision as we might like, but it also, again, students with mobility issues, we've got that up and down stairs again, and if we could keep the locker rooms where everybody has to change for phys ed in the same place, it would be great. And it would also, for teams and sports, reduce the amount of travel within the building. So that was a suggestion that we made. Providing ability to have FM systems in all learning spaces. That was an important thing. The FM system is a voice
It's like an amplification.
amplifier, that's
Yep.
the word I was looking for, thank you, yes, that teachers with students who have hearing impairments often use. But as a former teacher, I, several years, had to wear the amplifying devices around my neck. But how great would it be if all classrooms had that? Because some students may not hear as well, and they don't necessarily need it, but if they do, we'd have it built in for everyone to use. So it just seemed like a general accommodation that, again, would need to be considered for price, but if it wasn't too awfully expensive to add on, that it might be something worth looking at. When it came to the biggies, and I would call that the gymnasium and the auditorium, we suggested that the architects come back to you all with 3 options. A basic gymnasium, which you could have a gym class in, and you might be able to have a rec game in, and you could probably have a middle school game in, but you wouldn't want to host a high school game in that. It doesn't meet the needs for that. And with seating for the students in various numbers and abilities to pull bleachers in and out. So we asked for basic competition, a standard, which would be more what you'd want to see in maybe what they have currently at Runlet in their gym. That's a pretty good sized gym, and I think they're able to have 2 half courts, if I'm not mistaken. So something like that, where you could have the 2 half courts, you could have 2 teams practicing. And then the competition level, which would also include a 5,000 square foot multi-purpose room that would be perhaps used for weightlifting, cheer practice. So you could have multiple practices happening inside at one time. So we've asked them to maybe show us what those designs would look like, and prices for each for you all to bring forward at another time. There was a lot of community support for an auditorium. The kind of auditorium, it was not clear of a specific preference. So again, we asked for 3 options. One is a standard black box, which is sort of the very basic. You could do a show in there, but there's not a lot going on. You might have lights and maybe some sound, but not a whole lot more than that. A standard auditorium, or where you could do plays. I'm thinking the elementary schools have more of I would say that's more of a gym and a
Cafetorium.
Yeah, more like a cafetorium, where you might use one space for more than one purpose. And then what we consider the professional grade auditorium, which could go from the standard plus to professional theater show, which we don't expect anybody would sign on to that. But we wanted to see how much space it would take and what the cost for that would be. There was a lot of talk about different community people that might make use of these facilities if they were available. We have lots of different programs. The PTOs in different schools bring in different groups to present to their families, to the community at large. And could these spaces be rented out to community groups for reasons that, wouldn't be necessarily a school purpose, but could bring some revenue back in. And so depending on how everyone feels about that, you'd need to build a different space. So those are all things you will all need to consider. One of the things that we really encourage the architects to do would be to consider the footprint of the building to preserve trees and green space, which I believe that's one of the reasons the building is going up rather than out, to do that. So I think they're working on that. And when it came to fields, we considered that whatever fields be built for multiple purposes and multiple uses. And maybe if you could you're looking at a picture here of some baseball and softball fields. Would you want to have them practicing at the same time? Probably not. But at different times, they could be using it for different reasons, and you might be able to have some bleachers along the side that would make it useful for both groups. There was the track in the middle that the track around the field that had multiple uses as well for field hockey and lacrosse, I believe. And then you had your football field in the middle, and that was a grass one. And what did I say? There was a lot of conversation, and I've got to be honest with you, the group did not necessarily agree on that, on the need for the fields at this point in time. Some people felt that we don't need them at all, that the community provides fields and we should just be using those. There was a talk that Principal Richard shared with us that he thinks he would have about 40 students that would come out and try out for a baseball team if Runlet offered a baseball team, and that might be beneficial for students who don't have the ability to do the community programs because they don't have access to get to the fields where those practices and games take place. So this would be an option for us to offer that. Lastly, we briefly discussed a dedicated space in the building for a career pathways set of programs. We didn't have time to really get into that too awfully much, but some of the programs that were mentioned to us were a robotics program, wood shop, which is currently, I believe, offered at Runlet. I think that's the only one that's offered at this point. An interactive media space, which I thought was kind of neat, that maybe have like the students at the high school do a show sort of every morning where they give out the news and announcements, and we could have students doing that. Locate that near the library, and perhaps even a cooking lab that could also be used by after-school programs for students to learn how to prepare meals for themselves and maybe their families. When it came to the outdoor classroom, we'd run out of time to speak about those things, so we thought that that's something that would really be easier to add after the school is built and up and open, when you see what space is available and what the needs are. We really tried to focus our attention on things that were within the hard frame of the building, as that would drive costs as you go forward. So I submit this to you, and thank you, and if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you. Questions?
I don't have any questions, but can I just comment?
Sure.
So a couple of things that I would just like to reinforce as a teacher. The cafeteria, that space, a number of staff members have shared that space was kind of concerning because it seems kind of open and loose. And it could potentially provide the opportunity for some students to stray, but also to take in some students that maybe aren't supposed to be there. And so it would be a little bit hard to manage. I also feel like with the entrance where it is, it would seem like you're walking into the cafeteria. So if you're coming in as a visitor and there's lunchtime, is that what you want the first impression of the school to be? I don't know, but it seems to me like the impression might be a little bit more energetic than calm. So those were just some comments about, and then the other thing is, one of the comments we get from students most often right now is the cafeteria is so large. All the students are in there at once, which is the function of a schedule, and that's fine. But if there's any way to make it seem smaller, because even for students that don't have anxiety, it's not an enjoyable place to be for some. And acoustics definitely are part of that. The acoustics in our current building are not good, and so I'm sure that would be addressed. But in previous years when we had talked about designs, that was one thing that came up quite a bit, somehow making the cafeteria seem smaller. So that was the cafeteria piece. Yes to the FM, if we could get that in every room, would be fabulous. And then the one other thing is the flex space that Brenda was talking about. If we have the pods as is, which I love, and we have students going into these flex spaces, you need supervision. And you have to have adults. You can't just have kids going into these rooms by themselves. So if there's any way to have windows with shades to that open area, that would at least allow, I wouldn't necessarily be able to hear what they're talking about, but I could at least visually see what's going on. And so that would just provide that supervision piece. So like on those two, there's a flex and a small group that open up to the team area.
Yeah. Let me zoom in.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I can see better.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So at the top there, the flex and small group, if there could be windows on those that face a team area, then teachers could see in, and if students want to go, like if they need to record something and they needed a quiet space, but we could supervise.
There are actually windows shown.
Or are those what those are?
Nice little, like,
That
corner
line
things.
on the corner, there's a window.
Well, that just shows what a good idea it is.
We do have transparency into each classroom, so,
Okay.
and, you know, we typically provide blinds, right? You might
Yes.
need to close blinds
Definitely.
at some point,
Yeah.
but having that supervision is always really ideal, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And in the design development phase, we're gonna have the fly through.
Yes.
Right? So
Yes.
you'll actually, it'll be an animation, you'll
Oh,
actually
okay.
walk through the building.
3D.
of what it
And
would
and
look
we
like.
agree about the cafeteria, and I think as we move into design development, we'll start really getting into what that space looks like. And might be a way, you know, Brenda was talking about the stair as you come in. We want to move the elevator close to the stair. We might make a feature out of that. We had the school store there for a while, so that would kind of block your view of the cafeteria when you're coming in that lobby. And then we were hoping to design some lower ceiling areas so that kids could choose where they wanted to sit in that space. Because we agree that, you know, not everybody wants to be in the big 2-story space, right? And then we also added some screen walls kind of going down. I'll zoom out. Hang on.
Yeah, this idea about having to walk through this big open cafeteria, right? So we've developed sort of a loggia piece with the structural columns, and then in between that sort of a screen wall. You can alternate that with some areas of display. So you still get some visual connections, but you're a little more protected.
Yeah, so we'll work on that. And like Jack said, we'll be developing a fly-through, so you'll actually be able to see like a video of somebody walking through it in the next phase, and that will help you a lot more than these flat, 2D plans. Those aren't very helpful.
My memory of the earlier version is when you added the flex space, you didn't really you moved flex spaces that were on the sort of outskirts of the building more into the center
Correct,
of the
yeah.
building, which is something I know we heard from advocates, which is they wanted the services to come to the students as opposed to the students going to the services on the outskirts of the school.
Correct.
But it didn't necessarily add a bunch more
Right.
space, it just moved the
Right.
spaces.
Right.
Yep, so those spaces moved in here, so that every team pod has one more classroom now, which is gonna be great because, even if you had a bubble population one year, you could have more kids in that one team as you needed it. So I think it's a win-win all around.
When we talk about standard for the cafeteria, the auditorium, is that like a gymatorium or a cafetorium or is that something else?
So I think what we're gonna do is price a number of different options.
Okay.
So right now in the plans is the 900-seat auditorium with the big stage and the fly loft. From there, we would go down to a 450-seat auditorium, which is what the state would reimburse on, and that would have the same type of stage. Then we could go one step further down and take out the fly loft, and it would be more of, a music performance area. And I think that's what Brenda was talking about, where it's kind of scaled down, just the basics in there. And then if we really had to, we could go to a gymatorium. So that would be adding a stage onto the gym and taking out that entire component of the auditorium.
I think we'd like to see estimates on that option
And
as well.
we
On all of
agree.
them.
On
So-
all of them, yeah.
So we're gonna provide the estimator and the CM that's coming on board with little sketches for each of those, and they'll be able to give us a price.
What does the high school have currently, space-wise, compared to those options?
The high school, I want to say it's close to 6,000 square feet.
And what kind of, is it that black box, or is it?
It's more like this auditorium that we're showing. I didn't,
Smaller stage.
I think it's
720 to 720 seats. Does that sound right?
600. is what-
600?
By far.
Oh.
Yeah, 600 people
At the high school.
at the high school.
so you'll basically have a menu of options to choose from in order to get to the budget that you need to get to.
Additional questions, comments?
Questions about the fields?
Yeah.
And I understand that there was no real recommendation that came out of it, but what you're showing there is the field with the track around it, is that grass or turf?
To be determined, I think.
Yeah,
It could be either.
Okay.
So we'll price both.
And then the baseball, softball field, you mentioned potentially bringing on baseball, would that also be bringing on softball?
Yes, I mean, that's what
Yeah.
we've talked about initially.
And then the locker rooms, I understand the reasoning behind bringing them up closer to the gym. I know Mr. Richard also talked about, I think last time we met, that one of the reasons that they could be on the first floor is for access to those fields.
So-
Do the teams that use the fields not generally use a locker room? I mean, because it's,
So we
All
actually
outside.
left them in both places. We split it up square footage wise. So we left team rooms on the ground floor. Those could be used for when they're using the multipurpose space or the fitness room, and also for the fields. And then upstairs, we added changing rooms for the PE classes to use. And basically, it's so that, if a student has mobility issues, they don't have to change downstairs. They would have to come out to an elevator and then go up. And so we wanted everybody to have the same path of travel. So changing rooms are on both levels now. And we've moved away from locker rooms, and, there are more changing rooms and team rooms on the lower level.
So is the depiction now of the gymnasium showing 2 full basketball courts?
So this is the sort of medium size gymnasium. I'm gonna zoom in on it so you can see it better. It's bigger than what Runlet has today. It has 2 practice courts here and here, and then a competition court in the center. It's not the size, like a high school would have a 12,000 square foot gym, basically, and have more overrun space around their competition court and more space for bleachers. So it's depicted as the medium version right now, which is pretty typical for a middle school.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, no, so Tina, your next one down would be 7,000? If you're pricing, what, 7, 9, and,
We were gonna price a 6,000 square foot one. There's also on the lower level, the multi-purpose space is now 5,000 square feet. And that's so that they can host 3 wrestling kind of meets at the same time. That could also be reduced. You could decide to keep your gym at the 9,000 and reduce this down to 3,500 potentially. So there'll be a menu of all these different options for you to go to. And really at this stage, it's gonna be a square foot cost. So you'll just be able to do the math. We'll say, the building's $400 a square feet. And then if we cut 2,000 square feet, you can multiply that by the cost, and that would be the reduction. So the VE list will have all of those, mapped out for you. And the goal is to have more on there than you need to get to your budget, so you can actually pick and choose different pieces to get there. Well, the goal is to get you everything you need without having to do that, but.
I was just gonna ask a question about how we currently are scheduling practices and things at the middle school. So in my past life, when I worked at a high school, basketball practices went into the night to get all the teams through a small gym. Is that what we're doing, or how do they?
Typically, we do schedule multiple practices. Thank you, Kathleen. We schedule multiple practices, but we really like to get everybody done by 5:30 so they can take the late bus home. So that's why you have that like 2-hour window. School ends at 3:30. They might have an hour practice, then another practice, but we want to provide so everyone can be brought home.
And that's kind of what I was getting at.
Yeah.
Is, just making it accessible for kids, having the space that you can get all the kids through the practices they need.
Exactly.
In a reasonable timeframe.
Yep.
Do you also plan to price out the costs for the various fields?
Yes, each of the individual fields will be priced separately.
Okay.
And we'll also price a turf field. And we were gonna try to get some information on maintenance of the grass field so that you can compare, what it costs and, how many times a year you can use those fields versus the turf fields.
Do you price in lighting? I don't know if that came up.
Are we pricing lighting? Oh, for the fields?
Yeah.
We can add that in if you're interested in it.
I don't hear about multiple practices and 5:30, and I don't know when we have
And
the.
if all the kids come in nasty, you'd be out there playing soccer and they're dark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah, I mean, the way the layout is now too, it's not adjacent to the abutters, so this abutter, but,
They play flag football, but it's.
Right now?
mostly-
They're doing it right now?
Right
Yep.
now, a lot of soccer.
And is the football field for the high school to practice on or for flag football?
It's flag football, they're
Yeah.
not practice, the high school
Yeah.
is not.
Yeah.
They would continue to practice at the Runlet site.
Yep.
As well as on their field at Memorial Field. It's flag football that the kids play.
so,
The rectangle in the middle is really just showing it's a multi-purpose kind of green space, so it could be used for field hockey, lacrosse, soccer. So they've just overlaid all of the different field types on that rectangle.
and you can stripe it however you want,
Right.
so.
So I guess my question would be is like, in terms of the fields that are there, how does that compare with what you have available today? Because assuming you're gonna try to continue to field the same number of fields, what do you need to have to be able to do that here? Like if you have a track, then the kids can go there, but I assume if you don't have the track here, then that means you're gonna be busing kids over to Memorial Field and
Yeah.
back because they can't drive.
Right.
So that's gonna be an added cost that we're gonna have to deal with. And then if for some reason we only end up with one field, currently, like, I think if I remember when my kids played soccer there, I think you had 3 games going at once in the field setup, and football was practicing on another field, so, football's not coming over here, but that still means you had 3 different field setups for soccer, so
Yep.
what does that translate to for needed space here? If not, then you're busing those kids as well over to the existing school or to Memorial or something for practices and stuff.
And
We-
field hockey in the fall.
And field hockey, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, but I think, depending on who you ask, I mean, I've talked a lot with my athletic director, Steve Mill at the high school, and the middle school athletic director, Scott Owen, like, when they look at these fields initially, they think it's doable, but if we only had one field, I would say it's problematic. If we just had one field and we have 3 soccer teams in the fall, for example, it would be very, very challenging.
Well, and costly, right? Because now you're gonna need to have a whole group of buses to just bus kids back and forth.
Yeah.
Or you're gonna cut programs and you're not gonna field teams.
It would be problematic, yes, I would say that, yeah.
So I mean, that's something that somehow has to be considered.
Mhm.
It's either gonna be an upfront cost, or it's gonna be a recurring cost, or you're gonna be just reducing programs entirely in terms of what's offered to the children, so.
Well, let me
Can-
ask a question about, ultimately, once Rundlet is relocated, all the students are up here at the new school, and things are up here, what's gonna happen to the Rundlet side? Is that gonna be sold off? I mean, that's a Jay question.
Undetermined yet.
Yeah, I mean,
Undetermined.
that property, at some point, probably will be redeveloped, and the likelihood of fields over there is probably gonna go away in the long run. I'm not talking about, the next 2 years, but eventually that lot will become something else, because the school's not there anymore.
Are those like paths in between the fields? The thing about the current Rundlet fields, and I agree with you, is that they're more, these look very defined, where I think the Rundlet space is much more flexible.
Like an open
And
field.
it's an open field, and so it's lacrosse, and it's soccer, and it's flag football. I mean, there's the baseball spaces and softball spaces are probably the most defined.
Right.
But there's still lacrosse and soccer played in front of those things. So I guess if are we making the best use of this space if we're like blocking them off in categories?
So what I would say to that is that I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Do you have a question?
I was going to ask how many kids participate in soccer, because I know that there were 3 girls teams in the fall, and I assume there were 3 boys teams as well. So
Yep.
how many kids is that?
So you're talking about close to 100 kids, 100 boys, 100 girls, approximately. Maybe a little bit less. I mean, I think every single year is a little bit different, but I mean, that's one of the things I think we're proud of, is that we provide an opportunity for every child. So every kid who wants to play soccer plays soccer, and that's why we have 3 girls teams and 3 boys teams, which is special.
It's wonderful, and that
Yep.
was my question. Is while I appreciate the preference to add a new sport, if you have 3 fields now for soccer and they're all desperately needed, and you have 200 kids playing, maybe we put the baseball fields on a future list.
Or although they're different seasons, right?
Yeah.
So
they're different
so
seasons.
we can maybe we have some more.
I think baseball and softball fields are hard to switch to soccer. I think all the rectangular ones are easy.
But I think we might be able to do it if that was the direction we got. We could, use the outfields for these 2, and, we can push them apart a little bit, and we can make it work for another soccer field if we get that direction from you all.
Well, I think we ought to also keep in mind that there are existing baseball fields up in the Heights now. I mean, Teach Park has baseball fields, and Merrill Park has baseball fields. It's not the Heights,
But we have baseball at Rundlet.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a regulation.
It's not. People have asked, and I've looked
Yeah.
at closely. It's not like a actual field.
Yeah. But
I was gonna ask a question, yeah, that's what I was gonna ask about. And this probably will make me not well liked at my daughter's school tomorrow, but there's a field at Broken Ground as well, and is there any discussion about sort of improving that, and making that, because I understand the after-school program is probably using it at Broken Ground School, but there's still playground space. Could that be middle school field space as well?
Yeah, the sentiment all along has been to make sure that we didn't infringe on Millbrook and Broken Ground, right? But as you know, Broken Ground and Millbrook are done by 2:30. The kids are, even if it's an hour after school in an activity, that's done by 3:30. The middle school is just getting out. So we haven't really ventured down that road with those fields, but there was a commitment not to impinge on the elementary kids and making sure that we didn't overtake their fields because we had so many requests at the middle school. But with the commitment that we have for a community out there, a K-8 community kind of setting, I know that Jay has talked with the principals at both schools, and knowing that that's something that they wanted to do, so that it's not like this is mine and you can't use it. We hope that the elementary kids will come over and use the facilities at the middle school. So there's going to be a lot of that, so that it isn't just going to be ownership.
What are the size of the fields that are shown there? Are those like high school regulation size?
Yeah.
So they're larger than what you have today. I don't think the middle school has to play on, they don't typically play on the same size field. They can, but they don't. I don't think they have to be. I think that what you have out there now is a smaller size field.
That's what I was
For
wondering.
sports.
What is the size space currently at Runlet as compared to what's being proposed? Do we know what the size space is field-wise at Runlet?
Square footage?
I guess, or
I think the soccer fields are like a U12 field, which is smaller than what we're showing. What we're showing isn't quite the largest, so you get it sort of, there's a step in between, so I'll leave it to the, I have to talk to our kind of athletic experts.
I mean, one thing you're gonna know after the estimate is what a field costs to build. And so at that point, you can say, wow, that's a bargain. We can put 4 of these in, or we can put 1 of these in. So we're gonna price these individually so that you can make some informed decisions in a couple of weeks.
When somebody donates it.
But
You can work on
I
that.
think, you know, flexibility is important. And, you know, I think, I know cross-country and track and field are also very popular at the middle school and have hundreds of participants.
Yep.
So getting the price on that is important.
So I guess while they're working on, you know, not today, but while you're working on pricing for that, should we be getting stuff through the district in terms of the what-if scenario of if we don't have fields, and now, you know, what's that gonna do to the operating costs if we're busing all the kids?
Or our
makes sense.
programs in general. I mean, I gotta speak up on that. I mean, if we didn't have any fields here, where, you know, I got 3 girls soccer teams, 3 boys soccer teams,
Exactly.
where are they gonna practice?
Right,
It's hard for me to think about, honestly.
yeah, so I mean, it's a big question as to, because you're either gonna, to what Rick said, if that, are we gonna keep using the fields that are at the existing runlet now and have to bus back and forth, or are we gonna try to look to the city to use other fields that currently may already have other programs on them, but we're gonna try to kinda squeak our way in? But I mean, it's probably something that if we're waiting for that pricing, we should be figuring out what the options are, so that when it comes in, we have it in hand, the various things, because otherwise we may say we have to have the fields here. And what does that do to the budget or the scope of the building, and maybe that means the auditorium goes away completely or something.
Well, if you sell that field, then it'll pay for this one.
There you go.
Well, it probably won't pay for it, but it'll certainly give you some
I
money
don't know,
towards
the
it.
price of real estate right now, I think it might.
Not the turf field with the track.
Kathleen, Jack,
Well, I was just
Matt,
gonna-
you'll work on getting that
Yeah,
information.
We will, yeah, we will. Transportation, obviously, I think you probably know how difficult that is for us.
Oh, yeah.
Buses and drivers and the expense related to that, and just moving a youngster every day for practice, they practice every day.
Well,
So-
and it's at the, I mean, except for the fact that Runlet comes a little bit later, but I mean, you're hitting near one of the premium times when school's out, so all the buses are
Right.
largely occupied,
Right.
so that means, possibly increasing the bus fleet and drivers, which, I mean, who hasn't seen the,
Right.
every one of us, they'd love to be a driver if they could get us right now, because there's always an ad for that.
And don't forget, we have a lot of after school when you think of the high school, because we're transporting all of those youngsters to their games, their varsity and JV games, and freshman games too, all 3
Correct.
levels. So the buses are transporting youngsters all over the state to play whatever sport it is.
Yeah.
Ms. Hastings? And then Mr. Cotton.
Thinking and hearing of the different fields, I taught at Broken Ground for a very long time, and I can see middle school teams walking to Merrill Field, perhaps to use fields if the city were so inclined. I don't see necessarily teams walking to Keach Park due to traffic and safety concerns.
As a transportation engineer, I agree wholeheartedly with that sentiment.
Peach Park is pretty, it's a hike.
It is longer than a mile and a half
Yeah.
walk from that site.
Yeah, it's
And
correct.
I've done it. Mr. Dunn joined us.
Yes,
It wasn't a great walk, was it?
no.
Yeah.
All right.
Two other things
Mr.
I'd
Cotton.
like to bring up, as long as we've got this slide up here, and if you don't mind, I'm just gonna stand up for a second here, but, this area between here and here, the wooded area. I'm wondering about the need for that, frankly, and there's been a lot of people who have raised the issue of let's try to cut as few trees as we can. Let's try to keep the bigger forest behind here as big as we can. And I just wonder why we're trying to hide the middle school from the other two schools, you know? I mean, so I'd like to see some thought given in whether or not it makes sense to close them up a little bit. And the second thing is somewhat related to that is, and this may have been brought up before because I was not at the last building committee meeting, but there's been some discussion about whether there are services that we could combine for the three schools since we've got stuff up there. You know, I mean, could we do one main cafeteria and have two heating cafeterias in the other two buildings, thereby reducing the needed staff? You don't need 3 chefs, you need 1 head chef, you know? Is there a way we could think about that, and maybe tightening that space would make that more practical? Nobody wants to walk down that path, you know, carrying food or whatever they do in January. But if they were closer, it might work better. So I throw that out there to the building committee, and also, you know,
What's the actual
think about-
distance between,
They're pretty good distance apart from one another. I mean, if you look at the size of the fields, like we could probably put a baseball field in between the two schools. So if that gives you any kind of sense of the
Well,
distance.
what's the length of the building? And you could plop the building in that location.
I don't
That's
think-
how far it is.
Yeah, I don't think the building's quite gonna fit in there.
not quite, but
Almost.
I mean, you could.
200 feet,
If you turned it, you know,
250
at a
feet?
45-degree angle and you slid it right up next to the other school, that's a pretty big distance.
I mean, right now, they're showing a lot of stuff. I mean, one of the things that they're talking about, obviously, is geothermal, so you're gonna need a field for that. So is that gonna go under the athletic fields? Is that the idea?
That's what we're proposing right now.
Okay.
It could
And-
also go under parking, but
And drainage and stuff like that, are they
Well,
gonna
they're
try to
talking
do
about
open
lawn,
drainage or
open
hidden
field.
drainage?
probably hidden
I mean,
stormwater under the fields,
Under
yes.
it would, yes. Maybe
Yeah.
400 or 500.
And how much clearing of that large parcel is being shown at the December site selection committee meeting? It was presented as 8 acres, and that looks like a lot more than 8 to me.
Yeah, we had, at that point, we had fields down on Portsmouth Street. So
Mhm.
that was in addition to the 8, so it's about 19 right now. And it
And-
was split kind of 8 and 8 when we,
Okay.
you know.
And so that wooded area is far less valuable for habitat and natural, connectivity. Why has that area been excluded?
Off of Portsmouth Street, you're
Mhm.
asking?
Yeah,
So-
because that's already isolated.
Yeah, so I'll defer to the district in trying to keep the kids closer to the school is what we've.
Well, obviously, the
attempted to do.
fields are used for physical education and for recess and so forth, so the access, if you look at the building and you go out the back, either in the first or second floors, you access those field spaces and recess, and we continue to have those available for students. If you move the fields all the way down in the front, where the Portsmouth Road runs, it really is a distance. I mean, you're talking about, time away from the class. It's an instructional class. It's not just, running around. It's an instructional effort by the teachers. So that was one of the reasons that we wanted to push it closer to the back end of the school.
I think we might still want to see the other original option, just,
I agree, because I mean, if you move the school closer, then you're closer to this end down here where the fields were originally thought about being.
I mean.
And that track is not actually all that close to the middle school building.
I mean, I am concerned about moving construction too close to the other schools.
Yeah,
I
agree
want a
with that.
buffer between them for the construction portion of it, but, you know, if you move the baseball field in between and then use Portsmouth, you'd have outdoor space for gym potentially, and we wouldn't be cutting down on the back.
I think
So,
also to be concerned about parents parking along Portsmouth,
Yeah.
because they will go any and everywhere. Would be my guess, unless the city puts up things and says, you can't park here. They might, but that would be my concern, I think, from a
But
safety
then where do they
standpoint.
park?
Well, they park in the lot.
Well, no, but if you move the stuff down onto Portsmouth Street, and you say they can't park there, now where do they
They're
park?
gonna park and then have to walk, is what I'm thinking.
But I mean, they're gonna be walking now.
I mean, they'd be walking anyway, except they wouldn't have the option of parking. I think what he's saying is you force them to park in our parking lot.
I think it's a great revenue raising opportunity for the city. No, I was thinking ticketing.
I mean, I don't think the distance, like during construction, is something to be too concerned about. I mean, if you think about it, they built Millbrook right next to broken ground.
And
So,
Abbott Downing.
And Abbott Downing.
Right
So,
next
I mean, that's a very limited time frame, and I mean, I think that the construction manager will be tasked with coming up with a plan to ensure the safety of the existing schools, children, and everything from the construction in terms of path for vehicles as workers and everything else. And it's a pretty, while it's a long-term project in terms of, it's not gonna be done in 6 months, at the same time, it's short-term in terms of the duration of the building. So if what you want is to have something closer to the buildings, you're gonna deal with that proximity a far greater time frame than you will the limited time during construction. And the city's proven that you can build right next to a school and not have problems.
Yeah, I'd echo that.
A lot of the
It's not that hard to do.
Well, and we did it too.
Yeah, it's not that hard to do. It takes a little planning, you gotta make sure your construction manager's on board with what they're phasing, but a lot of the work isn't, excessively loud. It's all doable, and, to Dana's point, if this is a 75-year plan, a season of disruption is, something we might wanna consider.
Or even
The
two.
biggest noise is gonna come from the site contractor because of the excavators and the like, and the trucks backing up, and, the bells and all the whistles that go with it. But remember, the majority of the site work, they're gonna push like the dickens during the summer, because that's when the ground is best to work, and the kids are gone. So you've got 2 months that they're gonna be working and making those loud noises, and by the time they come back, should be out of that major construction of the earthwork and onto the building at that time, so it'll be quieter.
I think if you consider moving the building, I think you need to make sure that there's still enough space for traffic flow entering and exiting, because it currently is a bit of a backup in the mornings and in the afternoons for drop off and pick up with Millbrook and Broken Ground on Curtis Hill. And if you shorten those entranceways, which are nice and long right now, and the bus is going in one way and the parents going in another, I think you're not getting into that mess. Where if you moved it closer, I would worry
I'd
that
also like to make sure we leave room if we have to do anything
In the
to
future.
add or change or rebuild at Broken Ground or Millbrook in the future, that we're not out of room on that side, but alternatives on that.
I also would like to say I can see the reason for building it closer together, but in my mind, I'm beginning to see sort of an educational industrial park, and I would not want to see that for our students.
If we change the site layout, do we have to go to the planning board and get a blessing on any of this?
The planning
Or are we
board,
exempt?
I mean, we're technically exempt, but we're being good neighbors and going in front of them, and showing them what we're up to. And this is, they assume that this is gonna be tweaked a little bit as we go through design, so I don't think, if we're talking about moving the building a little bit in this direction and maybe putting a field here, those kind of things aren't gonna upset anybody there, I don't think.
No, but if you put the fields down on Portsmouth Street and you got a parking spot, they may have a chime in on that.
They might, yes, agreed.
Is there something we could do with the field, a tree barrier or something on that side of the street so that
Down at
dis-
Portsmouth, yes.
discourage people from parking there.
Depends on what field you want to put along
Yeah.
Portsmouth Street. Like the baseball was a little harder to fit along
Yeah.
Portsmouth and keeping a green buffer. You could fit a soccer along Portsmouth Street and keep a pretty decent buffer. But there is a playground at the south end of that green space, that we had been trying to preserve.
Yeah.
That was part of Broken Ground or Millbrook. So we had always been trying to keep a little buffer there.
Matt?
We had a meeting with the city today, and we've had design development review meetings, probably 4, maybe 5 so far. So we may be exempt, but we are being good neighbors, and we are showing them. They've seen this. They saw it today. And they had, what, Jack, 14, 15 combined people with all the departments, so.
So what I think you're hearing is when we continue to look at this, we want to look at options that take less trees,
Correct. Yep.
even if it means going down towards Portsmouth.
Yep. I think we can definitely look at that.
I think, just for a last comment from me anyway on this, following up what Brenda says, is an industrial park, I see the same thing. We just get done talking about a cafeteria that when they walk in could overwhelm you. You could pull in there and you're gonna see all these buildings, and I think having that nice buffer is what the purpose of that school park complex was purchased for back in the 70s. And remember, there's 59 acres there, you eat into some of it, and then there's 121 that's preserved right next to it, in perpetuity.
But it was presented to the public in commitments, as the reasoning why the site was selected was that it was only going to remove 8 acres of trees in that parcel. So, obviously, there's a lot of unknowns and it may change, but I think the community would appreciate it being still considered.
I think that's great. Yeah, we can definitely do that as we move into DD, and you'll know the costs at that point too. So I think developing the land off Portsmouth versus up here is relatively the same cost, so it should be pretty easy.
Any further on this item 1 on our agenda? As we're at 6:30. Thank you, Ms. Hastings.
Thank you. Good luck.
Review revised space summary.
I think we sort of
So
did that,
sort of
but
did it.
I was kind of going along as you were talking, Brenda. So we've gone through our space summary and just sort of tweaked things as they've come up in our programming meetings with the educators and all of the working groups. So the building as a space summary total right now is at 112,000 square feet. The build 212. Sorry, we reduced it in half.
Almost the budget.
And our floor plans are showing basically 209,000 square feet at this point. So we're doing a little bit better efficiency-wise in the drawings, and we'll continue to work on that and get those numbers down. So I don't think there's any major changes in that respect. I'll just go through the plans and just re-point out what Brenda was talking about. We did add in those flex classrooms at every pod so that every pod has 5 classrooms. We are showing in blue the career pathway programs. So this is the food tech program here, and that would open up into the cafeteria. It could be open after school for kids to use it. It's also acting as the second health classroom because they do teach cooking in the health class. So we're getting double duty out of that space. The wood shop is here at the end of the main street, and the thought was to really showcase some of these hands-on programs. So they're in prominent areas. The robotics maker space is on the second floor here. And that interactive media space is located at this end of the main street off of the media center, which is on the second floor. The other changes that we were kind of talking about is the OTPT classroom is now integrated with the fitness room. And so that's in the athletics area here. The multipurpose room got bleachers for use for wrestling, cheerleading, other types of, assembly. Team rooms stayed on the ground floor to be used for those spaces, but also for the fields. And then As we pointed out, on the upper level, we did put in changing rooms to be used for PE or for any other sports happening in the gym, like basketball or, what have you. Right now, we are showing the 9,000 square foot gym, so that's kind of the medium option. And we are showing a large balcony, so we have the 900 seat auditorium in the plans for now. But like we said, we are going to draw up all those different options for the estimators to price.
How many world language
I was
classrooms do you
just
have?
gonna ask that question.
Remember off the top of your head?
I think 5.
Okay, I saw two, so I was
So
getting.
there's 2 here, and then up on the upper floor, there's 3. One,
Okay.
2, 3. And the MLL space that was talked about is up here on the 3rd floor. And the other nice thing is that we've made all of the classrooms 900 square feet. So they're all exactly the same. So you can use them interchangeably. They could be general classrooms, they could be world language, they could be whatever you need them to be year to year.
With
So
the
they'll-
exception of the science rooms, which makes
correct,
sense,
the
yeah.
science labs are bigger, and those are 1220 right now.
So Tina,
Yes.
just a question on, excuse me, on the auditorium again.
Yep.
If we were to go from the 900, which is depicted, to 450, for example, what's the reduction in square feet, roughly?
We had that.
4,500. So it's
4,500.
about 10 square feet per seat. So every seat you take out is about 10 square feet.
Okay.
So we just started building out this list of alternates, and this is gonna get a lot larger when we look at the cost estimates,
Yeah.
but number 3, the auditorium, we're also gonna look at going to 600 square feet, 600 seats as an interim.
Just keeping them all straight.
So each of these will get an estimate number, and then the estimate itself is going to be broken down into line items. So you're going to be able to see things like how much it costs for the lighting in the auditorium, how much it costs for the rigging in the auditorium. It'll be broken out to that kind of detail. So once we see that come back, what we typically do is go through and then meet with the 2 estimators, so our estimator and the CM, and we'll reconcile the numbers to within, 1% or 2% of each other. That way, both estimates reflect the current, atmosphere. So they come up, they come down in certain categories, and we reconcile them together. And then, once we do that, we go through and we say, what are the big ticket items? Like, what's jumping out at us as being, really expensive? And so we'll pull those out and say, it looks like the lighting is costing you $5 million. We can reduce that by these steps and give you some breakouts in terms of that. So it's kind of a multi-step process for us. But the next time I think we meet with you, that's what we'll have for you all to comb over.
Are you still at the point of having 2 elevators in the building? Is that still what it is?
Correct, we do still have 2.
And is that something that you looked at making them larger, particularly since the gym and some of that stuff's on the 2nd floor so that you could fit the stretchers in?
They are by code that size.
You have to have it,
Yeah,
right?
and actually the fire department today, when we met with them, specifically asked for that. So they are both.
Yeah, and the one is quite large. It's big enough to fit a big lift that you might want to bring up to, access equipment in like the gym or the auditorium.
Yep.
So,
Now, are these elevators gonna be ones like, because you can get them in various speeds? I would think that given the short amount of time between classes, you're not gonna wanna have the lowest speed elevator, because that's gonna be difficult for the school to manage if it's taking a long time going up and down. So you're gonna look at using one that is a quicker
Yes.
elevator so that that way it will work for the students.
Yep.
Maybe a little more.
It's a pretty standard school elevator.
The elevator itself, I know.
It's our goal to give you as much information as we can so that you can make your informed decision.
Is there anything that's not on this list that people think they want to see numbers for?
There may be things like, we could talk about flooring. We'll price different types of flooring, and you may all come back and be like, oh, well, we don't want terrazzo, we want X. So things like that we'll pull out as we see the estimate.
Okay.
So So I think this list will get longer, quite a bit longer.
I think one of the major pieces, obviously, is around sustainability. They've met several times. They've set goals for themselves and really highlighted the areas that they wanted to address, but they need more time just to kind of go back, and especially when it came to things like the roof mounts for solar panels. They really hadn't processed that out yet, so I think we'll see a little bit more from them over the next couple of weeks.
Right, and we'll be doing some life cycle cost analysis for you too, so that you can make a decision on the type of mechanical system that you're gonna have. You know, we're gonna look at probably, we usually do 3 or 4 different types of systems, and then that will also take into account how long to pay back for that system, also operational costs on that system. You know, because you might be thinking we should, you know, VE the geothermal, but in the long run, you might decide once you see the numbers that it makes sense to have the geothermal because it'll bring down your operational costs, you know, significantly. But we'll run all those once we have the cost per system from the estimate. So you'll get that information as well.
They'll also evaluate like the impact of something like a triple glazed window versus a double glazed window. So then we'll have the cost of those 2 different types of windows. And, you know, we can see what the payback would be if, you know, one is gonna save you more money in the long term, but cost a little more upfront. So, you know, we'll be looking at all that.
And you'll do that with the flooring and all that fun stuff too.
Yeah.
Other questions, comments, thoughts?
Just one more thought. You know, the original, that number that I never use, it included a lot of items that are no longer there, right? Just think about it, the land, cost of land on Clinton Street, the fill that we needed, you know, to bring that up to grade. There were a lot of items when that first proposal went in, the application went into the Department of Ed. Has that been scrubbed? It's the best word I can come up
Yeah,
with.
definitely, because the estimates now will be on this set of drawings, completely brand new.
Okay.
Not what we submitted for, you know, the funding from the state. These will be completely brand new, you know, start, and they're also, you know, they're not going to be as many contingency type items. We had a good contingency number in the price that went into the state because there were a lot of unknowns at that time, and so we've really been able to drill down on the program and, you know, what everybody needs. So I think we could feel good about that. It's also not the middle of COVID. The supply chains have really, you know, come a long way. It's not perfect, but things are a lot better than they were when we got that estimate. So I think people should feel good about the bidding climate right now. And I think we heard that from all the CMs that interviewed. I think people are feeling much better about the climate. So we should see, I don't want to jinx us, we should see better numbers. I was going to say much better, but.
Are there certain materials that will be problematic for us because of the length of time it will take to get certain items?
There is still some switchgear issues, generator issues, some HVAC equipment. So we will have to work with our CM to, you know, order those long lead time items and get ahead of that.
Yeah, I think we, year and a half wait for the one for the high school, the HVAC system.
Well,
Transformer too, yeah, Beaver Meadow.
Transformers too.
Dehumidified air
Yeah.
start until potentially the spring because the transformer.
I think it started 72 weeks, yeah.
We did, though, yesterday when we were interviewing the construction managers, all 3 of them talked about, you know, what is hard to procure and what isn't, and that sort of thing, and they've all got plans of how to get around those long lead times that shouldn't impact us, I don't think.
Speaking of construction manager, do you or Matt want to update on the recommendation that the Capital Facilities
Sure.
Committee?
I could start off.
The
and-
board is going to vote on it next week based on the
Yes.
recommendations of the selection committee, but not everybody
Okay.
is on that.
So an overview, we started with a request for a proposal. We call it RFP. That went out came back in January of this year. After that, we held a mandatory pre-bid meeting. We had 5 construction firms come for that meeting. After we selected the building committee, we then selected 8 members to be part of the selection committee. And those 8 members are in this room tonight. Nicole Fox, who is a civil engineer, Dana Adams, Jay Burgess, and Rick Brewster. And it was, I'll tell you, I mean, it was comforting to have that experience in the room while we were talking to highly qualified contractors. So yesterday morning, we started with 3 rounds of separate interviews, 1 hour apiece, 15-minute intro by the company, and then we had a set of questions that everyone was assigned a number to. We were able to ask most, if not all, of those questions. We had a deliberation process after, and about an hour and a half or so, and I thought it was a good exchange. I might open that up to others in the room, because you were there and experienced it too, and we deliberated after. You might want to add anything, or?
Matt, can you kind of detail the purpose of this part of the CM? Because it isn't like the building part.
Right.
It's a little different.
Thank you for saying that. When we sent out the request for proposal, we asked for pre-construction services, and that's that phase that takes us through construction documents. So we're at the tail end of the schematic design. We still have a couple of weeks left. We're going to bring the CM on, provided the school board on Monday votes. And I should say we unanimously selected Harvey Construction out of New Hampshire. So with that, to Kathleen's point, we'll be doing several rounds of VE and cost estimating, but they're going to jump right into the end of the schematic design. So when you folks go out with the PM&C, like you mentioned earlier, Harvey's got a whole full team of estimators that are going to also take a look at these building plans. So did that kind of cover what, the way we wrote that? Also is it gives us that opportunity with pre-construction services that if everything's going well, and you always hope for that, but if the team is really doing well, we also have the option to continue, or we also have the option to put it out for bid. So I think it's a pretty good safety net for the school districts.
The other great thing about working with a construction manager from our side is that they'll talk with us about buildability, they'll look at our details, they'll talk to us about phasing, and how they're going to orchestrate everything on the site. So it's really helpful to have them in the pre-design or the pre-construction services we've found on other projects.
Thank you. Is there anything else on your agenda? Matt, Jack, Kathleen?
I think we covered it.
We are probably going to call on you several times in the month of June, so ask for your patience. We're hoping to get the estimates back and to meet as a group to make recommendations, and then ask you to meet with the full board to go over some of the recommendations. So we will keep you updated as we get dates for all of that, but appreciate all of your service, especially those who served on the selection committee for the CM, as well as us. I know it's a day off from work for many of you, and appreciate you taking it. Anything else? All right, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Fox. All in favor? Aye.
Shorter than I thought.
Shorter than I thought, but we covered an awful lot.